session, you will have an opportunity to hear from Carter Friend. Thank you, Parker. Tell your story.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
How are y'all doing today? Good. So I'm Carter Friend. I'm the Deputy Director at York County Community Action, York County, Maine. And so just to give you a sense of who we are, as you're hearing from me, we are an organization providing a traditional range of community action services, from Head Start to WIC, to transportation, to a broad range of economic opportunity programs, and energy services. We are unique in one way, which I will talk about in a minute. We have a staff of about 220 people and a budget of about $18 million. We are a member of the whole family approach learning community, and so this is the moment where I'm going to pay attribution, because a lot of what you're going to hear from me is not our own original thinking. And so there are three organizations that we need to call out before I can even talk about that work. The first is the learning community itself. The learning community presented an excellent opportunity for us to come into a space, hear about best practices, talk about them with our peers, and in a thoughtful, considered way begin to implement them. So I cannot, really cannot underscore how important that was for us in terms of being able to move our strategy forward. There are two CAPs in particular that we relied on that are further out in this work than we are, and that's Garrett County, Maryland, who were very generous to us and very helpful with us. And also the Arizona Community Action Association, which I think is now Wildfire Community Action. I'm not positive about that. So in any event, acknowledging the CAPs that have really helped us that we stole shamelessly from. Our approach is called our whole client or whole patient approach. And so the use of the word patient there actually is a clue as to a little bit of how we're different from some community action agencies. One thing that brought us to participate in the learning community is that we are both a community action agency and a community health center or federally qualified health center. How many folks know what qualified health centers are, CHCs? So for those that don't, they actually are our sister organizations. They also grew up out of the war on poverty and were part of the Johnson administration war on poverty. Just as we are community-based organizations focused on social services and addressing social needs, they are the same addressed in health needs. So in our particular case, we provide not just the range of traditional CAP services, but also health services. We provide clinical medical care, dental care, and behavioral health care, all under one roof. Now the reason, there are about 15 of us across the country that are both CAPs and community health centers, but the reason that's relevant, I think, for you guys is that there's a community health center in each of your communities. And as I'll talk about in a second, I think we all recognize, as Tiffany said, that the barriers and challenges that many of our clients face are complex and include both health components and social service components. And so it was important for us to better integrate these services, to better serve our clients and patients, and that was our real interest in joining the learning community. We also were really focused on this point that Tiffany just made around we as organizations help meet urgent needs, but also help folks, individuals and families move to self-sufficiency, which by the way is a phrase I will use a lot, but I also do not like. So that's a whole different conversation about a better way to express that concept. And so we recognize that the challenges facing our clients have changed, and moving them to self-sufficiency requires a different set of approaches. And so we believe that the whole family approach is an important way to do that. And so we wanted to join the learning community to help test that. Is that true? Is that an important tool in our toolkit for helping families and individuals move to self-sufficiency? So what I'm going to do is just, so our goal of participating in the learning community and in our pilot project is frankly to test that as a proof of concept. Our goal is not to create a whole family approach. Our goal is to move folks to self-sufficiency, and we believe this will be an important tool to do that. So let me walk through quickly just the elements, and I'm going to keep this at a very high level because we each only have about 10 minutes, so we're really just giving you a quick flash of what we're doing. But there are 5 elements in our approach that I'm going to mention. The first is working with clients to assess their needs, set goals, and then create an action plan to move forward that we call a pathway plan. So we use something called a self-sufficiency matrix, which we did steal from Garrett County in Arizona. Are folks familiar with this matrix concept? Some folks are raising their hands, some are not. So let me just mention, down this left side are all of the issues that we know that clients experience that are barriers to self-sufficiency: mental health, food, housing, education, employment, etc. And then across the top are ratings from 1 to 5 in crisis to self-sufficient. And so we work with clients over time to assess this broad range of needs, to understand where they are, what the barriers are to self-sufficiency, and then the clients themselves set goals with our support based on this, and then they implement a pathway plan, which is a series of activities they identify to achieve their goals. They can be short-term goals and long-term goals, and it can be multiple action plans over time. The folks who work with the clients to do that and the patients to do that are our coaches. And so these are quasi-case managers. We have historically used our CSBG funding to fund what we call outreach workers, which are these quasi-case managers. We've expanded and elevated that practice. And all of these coaches are trained in poverty-informed practice, trauma-informed practice, motivational interviewing, two-gen approach, and they work with families over time. And the key being that it's not a transactional relationship, it's a long-term relationship so that clients can stay with us over time or come and go over time and have a relationship with one individual they're working with. A third key element to our strategy is internal and external resource alignment or integration. The clients experience complex problems. They often require complex solutions, which require multiple services or resources. Our goal is to make sure that those are integrated as seamlessly as possible and accessed in a low barrier way. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, because that's a real challenge, I think, for all of us. The fourth part of our strategy is centralizing our data. I'm sure that we are not alone in having multiple data systems in our organization. So if Carter Friend approaches our health center, and the next day approaches our LIHEAP service, and the next day our transportation service, we don't know that, right? We do not have data in a single place. So we were working with the folks at Empower, which is a software program that came out of Garrett County, Maryland. They are developing what's called a data warehouse that we hope will be able to take all of this data, put it in one place, and begin to match Carter Friend when he shows up in our organization. We'll be able to do two things with that. One is for the first time actually report on how many unduplicated clients we actually serve, which I don't really struggle to do, but also more importantly dig into how many single mothers are we serving, in what communities, and what outcomes are we achieving for them. Then the second thing we'll do with that is put that information in front of our frontline staff so that they will know if Carter Friend comes to the health center and the next day comes to LIHEAP, that he in fact has approached our organization in multiple different doors. So a no wrong door approach. The final part of our key strategy for us is this intersection of community action agencies and community health centers. We're using something called the social determinants of health. Again, how many folks have heard that phrase? So about half or more than half of folks in the room. So that just is a lot of science recently that recognizes that health outcomes are only about 20% of health outcomes are dependent on access to clinical health care. The other 80% is a function of housing, food, employment, education. And so we know that in order to be healthy, you need to have food and you need to have a safe home and be employed. And likewise, in order to go to your job or go to school or take care of your family, you need to be healthy. Close interaction between those two. And we also know that there are many barriers to aligning those services. I'll talk about this more in a second, but there are very different cultures between health organizations and social service organizations that present real world barriers to actually creating seamless alignment. And so that's something we're working on. Some of the challenges and barriers we've seen as we've done this, I'm just going to mention it because it was kind of interesting. We're only 5 months into our pilot, so we're not very far along. Our pilot includes 35 families from 4 different program areas for us. And what was interesting is we were all gung-ho to work with folks on these very complex pathway plans, but not surprisingly, they came to us with a presenting need that was an urgent need, and then some of them weren't ready to move on to work on something more complex. They had their everyday challenges in front of them or concerns in front of them. So we had to slow ourselves down and recognize that relationships move at the pace of trust. We needed to work with some folks over time to develop that trust and also be there when folks were ready to move on to maybe another part of their pathway plan. Another challenge and barrier is this concept of alignment and integration. So I just think it's important to call out that even within our own organizations, we have cultural differences between LIHEAP and children's services and transportation around how we serve clients, how we look at data. I will say, frankly, we have trust issues between our departments, where departments may or may not trust each other's work, if we're frank about that. And so that's, even if that's true within our organization, you know it's true across organizations. And so these are real-world adaptive challenges. I don't know if you all have looked at the difference between adaptive challenges and technical challenges, but adaptive challenges require changes in behavior, are complex. These are real-world adaptive challenges that we have to deal with if we're going to be able to move to integrated and aligned services. And we're working on that with our internal programs and also with external partners. One of the shifts in thinking that we saw is this increased focus on outcomes. So a lot of this work for us was a result of strategic planning work that we finished about a year ago. We put a real stake in the ground around increasing self-sufficiency and improving our strategies to do that. And so where I think and hope we're headed is that when someone in our LIHEAP program, for example, is working with someone on making sure that they're warm during the winter, our staff are now also thinking, how else can we help them with their complex set of problems to move to self-sufficiency? And so that shows up at the agency level, where we're emphasizing that as an agency result, self-sufficiency across all of our program results, this overarching agency result, and it shows up with individual work with clients as they now think about trying to understand what the broad range of issues facing clients are, using the matrix and using the pathway plans. One of the aha moments for us, which was kind of interesting, I mentioned to you that we had been using CSBG funding to fund this quasi-case management work over time. And as we moved into trying to increase our work on self-sufficiency, we found that most of the clients we had been working with one-on-one were either seniors or folks with disabilities. Now that's fantastic, that's really important work to do, but it's very different than working with individuals and families that may be struggling with other issues related to self-sufficiency. So that's not so much an issue now with our pilot, but as we expand this work, that could become a resource issue, and we may have to make some hard choices about who we're going to work with unless we can expand our resources. Success and outcomes. For us, we're only a few months into our pilot, so successes, for the most part, so far, are process successes. We have trained all of our coaches on all of the issues that I mentioned before. All of our families in the pilot have done the assessment and have put together a pathway plan. Our coaches are now meeting on a monthly basis across multiple departments: Head Start, Economic Opportunity, WIC, and the Health Center. And they're meeting on a monthly basis and have developed a uniform practice. We're also seeing some early signs of success with the clients. So we have a client who was struggling to get back to school, is now back to school. We had a client that was struggling to find employment. We worked with them on that, and that person has now applied for multiple jobs and has, we think, is about to get a job. So we're beginning to see some early successes with the clients in the pilot as well. We were asked to share some inspiration to the group, and so my inspiration for the group is going to pick up on something Tiffany said. I believe we, as a society, we find ourselves in another Gilded Age, and the issue for us as a society right now is income inequality that is exacerbated by all the issues we've been talking about at this conference around gender and race and status. And we as organizations are precisely situated in that space to make a difference on these issues. And I think the Community Action Partnership has recognized this, and what it's done for us in this learning community, and I think is doing for the whole system, is helping us develop the muscles, either enhance muscles we already have or develop new muscles we're going to need to respond to that space. So muscles about being nimble, muscles about collaboration, muscles about using data, muscles about focusing on results and how we work with our clients and using innovative strategies. But I do think we are precisely situated to do that work. And if we do that work, then we will not just find ourselves helping individuals and families thrive, but also, as is part of our mission, finding communities thrive. But I believe that there is this tremendous sense of urgency in that work, not just because our clients and communities find themselves in a place of urgent need, but also because I believe things are changing fast, and we as organizations need to remain relevant. And if we don't move fast into the space, we may find ourselves not being relevant. Our next steps are to continue to refine and expand our pilot and learn from our pilot, and then we have a particular emphasis on centralized data. We're very interested in trying to tackle that particular problem. So that is it for me. I will pass the baton. Is that what I'm doing, or introducing?